Hello everyone, and welcome to our deer season Q&A session. We apologize for yesterday's live chat being cut short. We only got through about 15 minutes of it. So we're trying this again today. I'd like to thank you for joining us. I'm communications specialist David Allen, and I'm here with our state deer biologist Charlie Killmaster. Hunting season starts this weekend. Well, deer firearm season starts this weekend. And I know there's a lot of excited hunters out there, so let's go ahead and get started. You have anything you want to add to that?
Just hope everybody has a great opening day this weekend, and I hope each and every one of you get a chance to get out and get in the woods this weekend.
All right, well, we'll start it off with a question from Barry. As you know, Georgia split into both a northern and southern deer zone. What's the reason for the two zones?
Well, you have to look back historically. We had a number of different zones throughout the state, in excess of a dozen, and that was kind of a relic of our restocking effort. We had wide variations in deer populations across the state, and in fact, some zones even had a closed season on deer to boost those populations. As the deer population grew over time, those zones were collapsed further and further down to where we were left with just two zones.
I know you have an interesting story on the next question, but what do you suppose will provide greater deer hunting success this season? Hunting over a food plot or near oak trees?
Well, it's a great question. Obviously, in most cases, if you've got white oak acorns hitting the ground, that's what deer are going to key in on. However, they have a wide variety of nutritional needs, and they're not all going to be met just with acorns. So either choice is actually going to be a pretty good idea if you've got an opportunity to hunt one or the other. Actually, if you got a food plot with an oak tree right next to it, that really helps out. I was hunting last weekend with my muzzleloader, and I was hunting on a real nice alfalfa plot we just had planted, and it was starting to come up. And the first deer that walked out into the food plot, she walked right over, skipped over the alfalfa, and started eating acorns. So it's good to have both if you got it.
All right. We had a similar question as this one last year, and I know it's a popular topic for many hunters. Tim's experienced an increase in sightings of coyotes on his property, and he's concerned about the impact on the deer population. What do you suggest to hunters out there? Do you suggest that they shoot a coyote every time they come across one while deer hunting, or is there another method that they should take?
Okay. Well, the first thing you need to do is figure out whether coyotes are actually causing you a problem. Through quite a bit of research that we've done in recent years, we found that the impacts of coyotes are really variable across the landscape. So before you expend a lot of effort into controlling coyotes, first you got to pinpoint where the problem is, or if you have a problem. The easiest way to do this is to monitor your fawn recruitment rate with trail camera surveys, and this is the ratio of fawns to does that make it into the hunting season. And monitoring that, and I recommend you consult one of our biologists to help you figure out how to analyze your photos from your trail cameras to get that information. But if you determine that you do indeed have a problem and that you need to control coyotes, the recommended method is to trap coyotes immediately prior to and during fawning. So shooting coyotes from a deer stand might make you feel a little bit better about it, but it's not really doing anything to help the situation, or even by the time fawns start hitting the ground later in the spring, May or June, you're likely to have a whole new set of coyotes that have moved in there. They have very, very long movement patterns, and they can cover a lot of ground. So if you've got a problem, that's the most effective way to tackle it. In most cases, if it's just a minor problem, you can really just mitigate that by decreasing your doe harvest temporarily. I've even seen some clubs basically put a moratorium on doe harvest for a season to get them over that hump a lot quicker.
All right. Our next question comes from Bobby. He wants to know, why does the state no longer stock deer and turkeys in Georgia?
That's a great question. If you look back at our restocking effort, which ended for deer at least in the mid 1970s. For most of it, we did some restockings up into the early 90s, but in most cases, those restocking efforts for both deer and turkeys were to form seed populations of those species across the state, and over time, those seed populations grow together. While we have a number of different areas throughout the state now that, in a lot of cases, may have been over-harvested of deer, and populations may be lower than hunters would desire, there's still plenty enough of a seed population either in that area or from surrounding areas that they can repopulate that area if harvest is brought under control. So it's not really advantageous. It's very expensive to move them. And on another note, another issue that we noticed here recently is some disease concerns that come along with moving animals around. Whenever you move an animal, it's a biological package. You're bringing that animal and its parasites and any diseases it may be harboring and introducing those parasites and diseases to a new area. We recently found that we imported a particular strain of bacteria that causes cranial abscess in bucks when we imported deer from Wisconsin. That's a problem that we're faced with today, even though those deer were brought in 50 plus years ago. So that's something they didn't even know to look for back then, and that's one of the bad things about moving animals around like that. So if you've got a source population, the best way to handle it is through reducing harvest and allowing the local population to restore itself.
All right, our next question comes from Lewis, and he has a question about the coloration on deer antlers. He's always heard that white antlers on a deer shows that the deer lives near oak trees, and that dark-colored antlers are the result of a deer that lives in the pines. What causes the differences in antler coloration?
Well, he's onto it a little bit. There's a few different schools of thought on this, but and a couple of different factors, and I think it's a combination of all of these. But the amount of blood that's present in the antler velvet when the velvet is drying, and the variation in how bucks shed that velvet, whether they let it completely dry before they go to rub it off, or whether it's still wet and they go to rub on some trees. And then the whole tree species thing is kind of the result of a believed chemical reaction between the undried blood or the dry blood in the antlers and the particular type of tree sap, namely pines or other conifers. So that can lead to it. Genetics play a role in it. Some bucks are going to be more predisposed to darker antlers than others. And then over time, and this is really more the case as you go into the Midwest and vastly open country, progressing throughout the season, antlers can turn whiter as they're exposed to sunlight. And a great example of this is if you find a shed antler that's approximately a year old. In most cases, it's going to be bleach white, and that's just from the sun bleaching it out. So they can get bleached by the sun if they're exposed to it. In Georgia, not so much a problem. We got pretty good forested cover throughout the state, so I don't think you see a lot of bleaching around here.
Okay. Our next question comes from Don. He's a new resident of Georgia, and this will actually be his second season hunting here. Why do we require a deer harvest record if there's no requirement to send it in after the season's over?
Another good question. The deer harvest record is actually a law enforcement tool and not a data collection tool, as he suggested. If you were to mail it in, that would be a way to count deer, although the reason we don't do that is it's a very poor way to count deer harvested. The way we currently estimate our deer harvest is through a telephone survey of licensed hunters, and we develop a harvest rate that we extrapolate to all the hunters in the state, and that gives us a very accurate and statistically defensible rate. But something new, and this is an action item in our deer plan, is to develop a harvest reporting system. And this is where a lot of states have this. It's where you either dial a 1-800 number, use a smartphone app, or a web page to report your deer harvest within a certain allotted amount of time, 24 or 48 hours, and depends on which state. But everybody would be required to report that harvest. And while it may be a pain, the great part about it is it gives us a lot more localized information down to the county level that we currently aren't able to get with a telephone survey, and it gives us the time throughout the season, what particular days certain numbers of deer are killed, so we can determine exactly how many deer were killed and reported on opening day of season, Thanksgiving weekend, those popular dates, and that can help us design things like the specific timing of either sex days and those type of things that help us manage deer in Georgia.
All right. We have a couple questions from Duncan, and I'll start with his first one. Why are we limiting either sex days? That's been a change over the last 2 years, and it's still in effect this year. So he's curious about why the limit on those either sex days.
Okay. Before I get into that, I'll tell you we do our regulations in a 2-year cycle. So when we establish a regulation, it will be in effect for 2 years, and then after 2 years, we'll go in and make a change, unless something major happens and we have to do a mid-cycle change. Now, the reduction in either sex days that we saw last year and will continue to see this year in most counties of the state are responsive to a decrease in the population, which really was by design. If you look at our old 10-year deer management plan that we're nearing the end of currently, a lot of portions of the state were slated for a reduction in the deer population due to overabundance issues. We've met those reduction goals, and now the population is at a healthy level. In some areas, it's too low, and so the goal now is to, in most areas of the state, is to stabilize the population or slightly increase. If you get up into the mountains, it's more of an interest in increasing the population more substantially. But that reduction in either sex days is to reduce the antlerless harvest and therefore stabilize or slightly increase the population. As you know, the females in the population are the drivers of the population growth. So we control those either sex days to help manipulate the population as a whole.
All right. And his next question is, why don't we extend the end of the season to catch the second rut? Maybe you could go into some detail on that.
Yeah, this is a great opportunity to plug our new rut map. If you go to georgiawildlife.com/rut-map, you can find a copy of our rut map. And it was a collaborative effort that we developed between UGA, University of Georgia Deer Lab researchers, and Georgia Department of Transportation. And we use deer vehicle collisions as an indicator of peak deer movement in all the counties throughout the state. And it's we actually tested it against some conception data we had from a few different counties, as well as movement data from GPS collared bucks and does. So that's it all lined up really well, and we're real pleased with that. And the information we found in the development of that map is that most of the rut in all parts of the state is encompassed by the season. The latest rut we have, peak rut, is in late December. So and that's only really in the extreme southwestern portion of the state. So most areas of the state are going to encompass the peak of the rut and what a lot of hunters might refer to as the second rut, which is when unbred does go into their second cycle of estrus, or in a very healthy population, a percentage of the doe fawns come into heat their first year. So not all of them will, only a small percentage of them, but that can drive what a lot of people refer to as a second rut. But just because you see a buck chasing a doe does not mean that you're in peak rut, or even a so-called second rut. The actual breeding dates for a given area can stretch for a month to a month and a half, even 2 months in some cases, from the first doe bred to the last. So just because you see one doesn't mean that you're in the peak rut. But by and large, our long season, one of the longest seasons in the country, actually vastly encompasses the the breeding period for whitetails.
Okay. Our next question comes from Anderson. I hunt on private land that has very little hunting pressure. However, the bucks are usually nocturnal and very paranoid. What are some suggestions for overcoming this problem and harvesting a buck?
That's a great question, and something a lot of people face. Mature bucks don't get mature by spending a lot of time out walking around in daylight hours during the hunting season. So they're one of the most difficult critters to hunt, and a couple of tips here, what I would probably do if it were me. I'm sure you've already got trail cameras out, which is probably why you know the bucks are there, you're just not seeing them during daylight. I would look for an individual buck that might be spending some time during daylight hours and use those cameras to try and pattern his movements. Additionally, I would seek out the bedding areas on the property. When they're bedding down during the daylight hours, they're going to be pretty immobile. You're not going to get a chance to harvest them. But if you find those bedding areas, you can hopefully pinpoint where they're entering and leaving the bedding areas by looking at the deer trails, maybe even using some trail cameras on those trails, and try to catch the deer coming out or going back in the wee hours of the morning or coming out right at dusk. If you're hunting food sources, a food plot or oak trees or something like that, it's going to be very hard to catch a mature buck actually on those food sources if they're pretty skittish like that. So you want to catch them en route going to or from. That's probably when you're going to catch them moving in daylight hours when they're going to be harvestable.
All right, well that concludes our deer season Q&A.
David, before we get into that, I realized that I didn't adequately address the deer zone line issue,
okay.
And I would like to go back to that. Going back to the deer zone line, why the two different zones? I can tell you this, here lately as part of our 10-year deer management plan process, we have an action item to address the zone line issue. There's a lot of interest in moving towards a single statewide season, and so we're going to be doing that. We really don't know exactly what's going to be the most widely accepted ending date. So we kick back to this next regulatory process. And if you come to our public meetings in January, you can find the locations and dates across the state in the current hunting regulations guide. We're going to bring that topic up again for discussion, and this time we're looking specifically at which dates we're going to select. But we are moving towards a single statewide season in Georgia, and that's responsive to public input. There are no biological concerns with doing so, so we're going to move in that direction, and we hope to see you there. If you can't make it to a public meeting, you can always submit your comments and your input through our website at any time. It counts just the same as attending the meeting, so I just wanted to cover that.
All right, well, thank you. Again, we'd like to thank everybody for joining us. I know our live chat yesterday was cut short due to some technical difficulties, and we apologize again. Special thanks to Charlie here. We hope we were able to answer most of your questions satisfactorily, and we would like to wish all of our hunters a safe and successful deer season this year. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd also like to wish everybody a happy and safe season, and with a safe season, I really recommend that everybody wears a harness every time they climb a tree. That's our #1 hunting accident, and one that concerns me a lot. So I want everybody to make it through the year without injury or worse. So wear that safety harness, wear your orange, and be safe out there. But really enjoy your season. I'll be out there with you this weekend, and I won't be working. I'm gonna be in the woods hunting with you also. Anyway, but I'm looking forward to a great opening weekend, and I wish you all the best of luck.
Well, thank you. Thanks again for joining us.